It so often starts with a simple, quiet statement. I'm sad. But how does that feeling, something we've all felt, transform into a clinical diagnosis? Well, in this explainer, we're going to follow that journey from a vulnerable moment in a doctor's office all the way to a clear, understandable answer.
And it all kicks off with a real story. Let me introduce you to Miss V. She's a 79-year-old retired teacher, and at the very end of a totally routine checkup, she just comes out with it. It's this incredibly powerful confession that completely changes the direction of the appointment, turning it into a crucial investigation. And believe me, this investigation matters on a massive scale. Ms. V's story is just one piece of a much, much bigger puzzle. In the US alone, depression costs the healthcare system an estimated $210 billion. That's every single year, just an absolutely staggering number. But the cost isn't just financial, not by a long shot. It's deeply, profoundly human. A heartbreaking 50% of all suicides in the United States are attributed to depression. I mean, that one statistic just shows you why understanding this condition is so critical. The stakes couldn't possibly be higher.
And you might be thinking this is a rare thing, but it's not. Not at all. Nearly 1 in 3 people in the US will go through a major depressive episode at some point in their lives. That means it's almost guaranteed to touch your life or the life of someone you love. So when a doctor hears what Ms. V said, they don't just jump to a diagnosis. Nope. They start with a very formal, very structured process. And the very first step in that process is called screening. And this is so important. This isn't just for patients who seem down. The official recommendation from the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force is that all adults should be screened for depression. It's part of routine primary care. The whole idea is to make it as normal as getting your blood pressure checked so we can catch things early. The tool they use most often is actually really simple. It's called the PHQ-2, and it's just 2 questions that cut right to the chase. In the last couple of weeks, have you lost interest in things? And have you been feeling down or hopeless? That's it. That's the starting line. Okay, let's go back to Miss V. She answers these 2 questions, and her score comes out to a 4. Now, on this little test, any score of 3 or higher is what we call a positive screen. So for her doctor, this is the first real concrete signal that they need to take a closer look.
Now, this is maybe the most important point I'm going to make. A positive screen is not a diagnosis. Think of it like a smoke alarm. When a smoke alarm goes off, it doesn't automatically mean your house is on fire, right? It just means, hey, you need to go check this out. It's an indicator, not a final answer.
So the smoke alarm is ringing. What happens next? Well, the real detective work begins at a follow-up visit. This is where the doctor's job is to dig deeper, to go way beyond those first 2 questions and really understand the full picture of Ms. V's life. And this is where medicine becomes a bit of an art. The doctor starts building this whole picture, right? They're asking about her personal history, like the loneliness she's felt since her husband passed. They're asking about her friends, her sleep, her appetite, literally everything. They're looking at the whole person, not just a symptom. Okay, so with all of this rich information in hand, the doctor is finally ready to move to the next stage. It's time to take everything they've learned about Mrs. V's experience and compare it against the formal official criteria. Time to pull out the clinical checklist. This checklist comes from the DSM-5, which is basically the official manual for psychiatric diagnoses. And what's so interesting is how specific it is. For a diagnosis of major depressive disorder, you need to have 5 or more of these symptoms within the same 2-week period. And here's the kicker. One of them has to be either a depressed mood or this thing called anhedonia, which is just a fancy word for losing interest or pleasure in things. This makes sure we're talking about a real significant shift, not just a bad week. And this is the magic moment. This is where it all clicks. Ms. V's feeling of being down in the dumps? Boom. That maps right to depressed mood. The fact she doesn't care about Sudoku or pickleball anymore, that's a textbook case of anhedonia. Her appetite changes, the constant fatigue, feeling like her life doesn't amount to much. One by one, they line up perfectly. She checks 5 of the boxes. And with that, the investigation has an answer. All the clues have been gathered, everything has been cross-referenced with the official criteria. Ms. V formally meets the diagnosis for major depressive disorder. But hold on, we're not quite done. There is one more absolutely critical distinction a doctor has to make to keep their patients safe. And to understand why, we need to look at a totally different case for a second. Let's talk about Mr. C. Now, Mr. C also says he feels sad, but his partner mentions that his moods are all over the place, up and down. Sometimes he'll stay up all night working, full of energy, and he's been spending money like there's no tomorrow. See? These are a very different set of clues than what we saw with Miss V. And this brings us to the key difference. Major depressive disorder is all about those lows, those depressive episodes. Bipolar disorder, on the other hand, has those same lows, but it also has these highs, what we call manic or hypomanic episodes. These are periods of super elevated energy and mood. And getting this right is not just academic, it is vital. Why? Because if you give the most common type of antidepressants to someone with bipolar disorder, it can actually trigger a manic episode, which can be dangerous and make their condition way worse. So an accurate diagnosis is absolutely fundamental to safe treatment.
So, all of this careful, methodical work brings us to the final and maybe the most important question of all. Why does having this official diagnosis actually matter so much?
First things first, we have to rethink what a diagnosis even is. It's not a label. It's not something to box a person in. It's the end result of a thoughtful, empathetic, and systematic investigation that's designed to bring clarity to someone's suffering. What a diagnosis really does is it takes that huge, overwhelming, confusing cloud of sadness that Miss V started with, and it transforms it into a known, understood condition. And once you can name a problem, once you can understand it, that's when you can really start to manage it. It's the essential first step on the road to recovery. So we've seen the whole process, how a doctor can go from one simple question to a clear answer, basically giving you a map where before there was only fog. But a map is just the beginning, isn't it? It leaves us with a real question. Now that you have the map, how does the journey to recovery actually begin?